In the late 19th century and the early 20th century, a wave of feminism crashed over U.S. society. Many women gained fame during this time as they fought for what they believed were their basic human rights. Women like Susan B. Anthony and Jane Addams paved the way for women's rights. The suffrage movement pushed for the right to vote and was successful when the 19th Amendment was ratified. The feminist movement fought for the equality of men and women. This fight is still being fought today as women try to close the wage gap. A modern movement, the Me Too movement, is fighting for the recognition of the credibility and validity of victims of sexual harassment and assault. These movements inspired hundreds, including Margaret Sanger. Prominent feminist and one of the leaders of the birth control movement, Sanger achieved much for women in her lifetime. The tragic passing of Margaret Sanger's mother due to her poor reproductive health led to Sanger's triumphs in women's reproductive rights, such as her advocacy for the diaphragm, her role in the founding of Planned Parenthood, and her development of the pill. Margaret Sanger was born on September 14, 1879 in Corning, New York to Anna Purcell Higgins, a devout Roman Catholic Irishwoman, and Michael Hennessy Higgins, a stonemason. She grew up in a lower-class family and was the sixth child of 11. When Sanger was 12, tragedy struck. After having 11 children and 7 miscarriages, her mother died at the age of 50 from tuberculosis due to her weak physical state. Consequently, Sanger blamed her father for pressuring her mother to have numerous children. As she grew up, Michael Higgins influenced her with his fairly progressive views, seen as radical at the time. In 1896, Margaret Sanger attended Claver College and Hudson River Institute. She completed a nursing program at White Plains Hospital in 1902, which led to her long nursing career. Her time as a nurse revealed to her the abundance of back alley abortions. This prompted her argument that birth control is a necessity due to the high levels of unwanted pregnancies. Her mission became to free women from the restrictions they experience through unwanted pregnancy.
Her main role was empowering women. I think she did, well, you get to it down in her history, but she saw a lot of what happened to women who had multiple unintended births or births when they were not safe or medically safe for the woman, and so I think her role was to be able to allow everyone access to that.
The same year that Margaret Sanger completed her nursing program, she married William Sanger, an architect, and moved to Hastings, New York. She had 2 sons and 1 daughter with him. In 1910, she joined the Women's Committee of the New York Socialist Party while living in Greenwich Village of New York City. As Sanger's fight for women's reproductive rights began, there had already been long-standing obstacles, one being the Comstock Act, passed on March 3, 1873. This act defined contraceptives as obscene and illicit and made it a federal offense to distribute contraceptives through the mail or across state lines. Margaret Sanger began writing educational columns in 1912, such as What Every Mother Should Know, in the socialist newspaper The Call. She began her monthly magazine The Woman Rebel in 1914. This led to her being indicted for violating the Comstock Act by mailing obscenities. She then fled to Europe while her husband was arrested in 1915. When she returned, she avoided arrest due to sympathetic publicity over the death of Sanger's 5-year-old daughter that pressured the government to drop the charges. In 1916, she set up her first clinic in the U.S. for birth control in Brooklyn, which led to her arrest and the clinic being shut down. This arrest caused a triumph in the 1918 Crane decision, which allowed for women to use birth control for therapeutic purposes. The same year, Sanger opened the illegal clinic. She founded the American Birth Control League, which would become Planned Parenthood. This organization continues to operate worldwide. In 1917, Sanger began publishing the Birth Control Review and was its sole editor until 1928 when the American Birth Control League took over. Margaret Sanger founded the league in 1921. It was renamed the Birth Control Clinical Research Bureau in 1923, the first permanent and legal birth control clinic in the U.S. She was the president for 7 years. The next year, she published the case for birth control. In 1927, Margaret Sanger helped organize the first World Population Conference in Geneva. The conference was held from August 31st to September 2nd. It was funded by J. Noah Lee, whom she married in 1922 after her 1920 split with William Sanger, the Rockefeller Foundation, and other supporters of Margaret Sanger. The conference included 6 sessions to discuss the ever-growing population. The end of each session featured an essay on the topic, such as Biology of Population Growth by Raymond Pearl. Sanger's goal was to encourage birth control, but delegates were not ready to reach a consensus by the end of the convention.
Margaret Sanger had the realization that she had to divert from her overtly feminist justifications to reach her goal when Sir Bernard Mallet, the president of Britain's Royal Statistical Society, asked her and her female assistants to remove their names from the official program at the World Population Conference. She began to justify birth control using eugenics. This was the belief that controlling the population would increase the chance of more, in supporters' opinions, desirable people. This was a widespread belief during the early 1900s. But in modern-day society, eugenics is correctly seen as immoral and racist. Her support of eugenics has stirred up great controversy.
Well, I don't think Sanger had immoral motives. So, and she was not connected. She did speak to a group of KKK women one time in an effort to spread the message about birth control, but she was not aligned with them.
In 1937, Sanger became the chairperson for the Birth Control Council of America. The council's purpose was to coordinate the activities of the American Birth Control League and the Birth Control Clinic Research Bureau, establishing standards of connecting clinics and discussing new directions for the birth control movement. It was established in the wake of the Supreme Court decision in the 1936 case, United States versus One Package, that allowed doctors to distribute birth control devices and information across state lines. One of her final accomplishments was Margaret Sanger's assistance in founding the International Committee on Planned Parenthood, which became the International Planned Parenthood Federation in 1952. Sanger was the president of the organization until the age of 80. Margaret Sanger spent her career advocating for different forms of birth control. She championed the diaphragm, a device that is inserted into the vaginal canal with spermicide. It acts as a barrier between the sperm and the egg. Sanger began researching the ability to create an easier way to utilize birth control when the diaphragm became too expensive and too uncomfortable. Gregory Pincus and Margaret Sanger invented what she called the magic pill. In 1950, this pill would make birth control more accessible. The pill allowed for the universal use of birth control among all classes of women because it was cheap and easy. It is still the main form of birth control today.
Well, I think having the ability to control when you want to have children certainly has allowed women to be better educated, maybe have jobs outside the home, prevent unintended pregnancies for younger women and older women.
One of possibly the biggest accomplishments for birth control occurred in 1965. The Supreme Court case of Griswold v. Connecticut involved an 1879 Connecticut law making the encouragement or use of contraceptives illegal. The Supreme Court decided the ban violated the right to marital privacy, legalizing the use of birth control for married couples. Margaret Sanger died on September 6, 1966, in Tucson, Arizona. This was shortly after the groundbreaking case. Sanger lived long enough to see her hard work pay off.
Today, the topic of birth control is still extremely controversial. People debate over the right to use contraceptives, some claiming it is immoral because it is preventing potential life, while others claim it is the right of the mother to choose. When Margaret Sanger championed the diaphragm in the early 20th century, she was pushing forward the birth control movement and speaking up for the right of women to control their bodies and their lives. She gave a voice to the women being oppressed by a patriarchal society. Even now, Planned Parenthood provides birth control to hundreds and helps keep many women in good reproductive health. Her magic pill allowed for an increase in accessibility and is the main use of birth control today for women who are sexually active or need it to maintain normal reproductive health. Margaret Sanger's fight for women's reproductive rights advanced the feminist movement by expanding the rights of women.
What events, what emotions in your life made Margaret Sanger a crusader for birth control?
Well, Mr. Wallace, it's hard to say that any one thing has made one do this or that. I think from the very beginning, I came of a large family. My mother died young, 11 children. That made an impression on me as a child. I was a trained nurse, went among the people. I saw women who asked to have some means whereby they wouldn't have to have another pregnancy too early after the last child, the last abortion, which many of them had. So there's a number of things that are one after the other that really made you feel that you had to do something.